Hello, and welcome to my recap and review of episode 6, The King, Eternal Monarch. And let me just say before we begin that this episode is amazing. I'm gonna just start off with that information. Before I was like, episode 5 is a little basic. Well, that's because they had episode 6 in their back pocket. And boy, howdy, was this a good episode. So without further ado, let's get into what happened in this episode and why I think it's so amazing. Let's get to it. So we don't start exactly where we left off in episode 5, but what led up to the Prime Minister showing up at the train station or wherever the detective and the king were. She's informed by the secretary that the king's plane was rerouted to Seoul, and she thinks maybe he's dropping by to see her, but that's very doubtful. And this is when the secretary mentions that the final destination, it makes him comment that this is kind of like when boyfriends go to pick up their girlfriends who missed the last train to Busan, and that for some reason gets the Prime Minister thinking, is he meeting a woman there? Why the secretary came out with that information so quickly, why his brain went to that first, I don't know, but that's what causes the Prime Minister to get more curious and pretty much ambush the king and this stranger at the station. I feel like that was a little weird, but we're just gonna let it go. The detective does her best to evade any questions that would give away her identity or relationship to the king, but when they leave together. So of course, that's already like a huge red flag to me. But besides that, the detective did her best. The king obviously does not care as much as everyone else if people figure out who she is or that they're together. And while she's trying to avoid answering the Prime Minister's questions and letting her know who she is, she says something funny that she studied liberal arts, which of course makes the king smile and chuckle, and everybody sees this. So, scandal. He likes her and she's with him, and that's all he cares about. Which is sweet, but also everyone's very frustrated by this. Once back at the palace, the king takes her down to the kitchen and cooks for her. He's a king and he can cook. Sign me up. Yes, he may stalk me a little bit, but worth it. We find out during this kitchen scene that not only did the king ask Young to follow the detective, but he also asked him to give her money if she asked for it. It's as if he knew what she was planning to do with the day. I mean, he did see her search history on his phone last episode, so maybe he reached out to Young after looking through that and figuring out what she was going to do and made sure that Young was following her or checking up on her. But I feel like Young was already following her, and so when the king asked, he was like, on it. With this whole cooking thing and him just being super nice and understanding, and her now knowing what it feels like to be alone in a parallel universe, the detective has for sure changed her mind about the king. I mean, I kind of feel that way before, since she did let him kiss her last episode. I mean, I feel like if she wasn't feeling him, she would have like karate chopped him immediately. So her feelings for him have definitely shifted. I can't tell if it's pity or respect, or she is into him as much as he's into her, but the romance has definitely blossomed, and her outlook and feelings for the king have definitely changed. Now, the conversation that I was wondering when it was going to happen finally happens in this episode, and that's Detective Young asking to see the ID that the king has of hers, and she wants to see it now because she thinks it's time for her to leave. And when she says this to him, the king does show her the ID, but says he wants her to stay and that he could, if he wanted to, command it. He says it in a very gentle, sweet tone. It wasn't rude or demanding, like, you can't leave because I say so, but I immediately did not like this response. I don't know why, but anytime that somebody's like, no, you can't leave because I said so, it gets me going. Not happy. It was still romantic. Like, if you look past that, it was him just wanting her to stay because he likes spending time with her and likes having her there. But overall, that's just, it's not a positive, it's not a good thing to be demanding of someone's time like that. Does that make sense? We get a glimpse of what's going on in the Korea universe, and we see Detective Kong thinking about the detective as he looks down at his slippers. We then go into a flashback seeing Detective Kong being beat up by a group of guys while he's in high school, and Young Hyung pretty much beating them up and saving him. Later, when they're all leaving the police station, she shows up there with a pair of slippers from the Taekwondo school and gives it to Kong because somehow he lost a shoe in the fight. And she noticed that, and so she brought him slippers. She cares about him, and he misses her. Meanwhile, in the Kingdom of Korea, the Prime Minister is thinking about what she just witnessed and a little annoyed that the king smiled and laughed at what this strange woman said when she tried, he's never smiled at her before. While that happens, she gets a phone call, and apparently Japanese warships are coming into the Kingdom of Korea's sea border. So she immediately notifies the NSC, which is the National Security Council, the king, and they start preparing for the possibility of war. Apparently, Japan is doing this on purpose due to an economic crisis on their end, and they're taking advantage of this situation to make a move on Korea. I think it has to do with the rare earth minerals that Korea has and distributes, but they don't give any real answers besides like news clips of, that the reason Japan is doing this is because of an economic crisis. I don't know a lot about war, so this part was a little confusing to me, but apparently Japan is doing this for that reason, to help with the economic crisis. Since this threat is pretty serious, the king decides that it is time for the detective to go back to her own universe and asks the head court lady to return her belongings and that he would explain everything to her. When the head court lady goes to get the items from her room, she realizes that the ID badge is missing. She calls security to see if there's CCTV footage of anyone going into her room, but because when the detective arrived, she was like, nobody comes in the palace after 8 p.m., there's to be no video recording of any kind, they don't have CCTV footage, so she doesn't know who took it. But that's okay, because the king just gives his ID badge that he has of the detective and tells the head court lady that he feels like this was supposed to happen and it's all kind of meant to be. Like, are we in a time loop right now? Because he mentions this is how it starts. I think this is how it all started. Like, it's just, this whole part, it freaks me out a little bit. And the fact that the king is so calm during a possible war and this weird thing happening with the ID badge, it's like he already knows. Before he sends the detective home, he asks if she will wait for him, and she says yes. So I guess she is officially his girlfriend. Or queen, because didn't he already propose to her in one of the previous episodes? Or was that just how they worded it in the subtitles? We then see her back in her universe, the Republic of Korea, back at work, back with her dad, taking down bad guys, and in a voiceover revealing that she didn't know that they would be apart for so long. That was kind of weird because it didn't seem like too much time was passing, but I'm moving on. Back in Korea universe, the plan that the king has come up with is that he's going to go and lead from one of the main ships heading towards the Japanese, since in the past this has sort of worked to keep wars from breaking out because he's in the front lines. But instead, the head honcho over in Japan, when the captain calls to let him know, hey, the king is on one of these ships, the Japan head honcho's like, great. He tells the captain to go full speed ahead because since the king's there, they're gonna go on the defensive to protect him, and this is great for us because they're gonna fall back because they don't want the king to get hurt. Well, I guess they didn't realize how selfless the king is, because when his group of people offer what Japan thinks they're going to do, he says the focus shouldn't be on him, it should be on protecting the border and full speed ahead. The king orders them to fire warning shots at Japan, and because of this, Japan retreats. So it all works out in the end. After that, the prime minister holds a press conference with the update and that they will no longer be giving Japan any rare earth minerals anymore, which seems very understandable right now. Meanwhile, in Republic of Korea universe, Detective Jung-kyo is thinking about the king a lot, and we see flashes of their goodbye, her planting some seeds that she brought back from Korea, both in the in-between and in Korea. She's also hard at work back on that case that she was previously working on and examining the voice messages on the burner phone they found. They are also still looking for the widow whose husband was the murder victim, since she kind of disappeared after the store was broken into and they haven't seen her since. If we remember, when she was last listening to these recordings, they were just random recordings of the news. There wasn't really anything that she could detect. It didn't seem to be a code, anything like that. But with a fresh pair of ears, it seems she might be onto something, because when she Googles some of the information that the news provides, nothing shows up. Like, it doesn't show up in any of the search engines, which is kind of weird if it was on the news. As she continues to listen and reminisce about her kiss with the king and in general missing the king, a name pops up in the recording that, honestly, if she hadn't been to the Kingdom of Korea, she might not have done a double take or even processed what it could mean. And that name was Professor Lee Jong-in. That's the Prince Pijong. So we also find out that he's the eldest son of the present king's grandfather, which I think we already knew that, but I did appreciate that little flashback to her researching all the different royals of the Kingdom of Korea. But anyway, after connecting this and what the king had said about what they call the regions of Korea, which is northern and southern, she realizes that this is actually the news, not from Korea, but from Korea. How do they get on that burner phone? When she connects this, she's obviously shook, and I was honestly shook myself. So that's very interesting. That's adding so much more to this plot. Meanwhile, back in Korea, So-young gets news from the police officer that Detective Jung-kyo's prints don't match anyone in Korea, which we kind of knew was going to happen. He also asks if the police had been able to locate Luna and bring her in for the palace to question her. But the police have been having trouble finding her / IDing her on the CCTV footage, because she seems to know where the cameras are and has been able to avoid them, thus they can't see her face. Hyung is obviously not happy about this answer and goes to investigate further. He decides to take photos of 2 members of the royal court, a scan of the detective face from CCTV footage, and he goes to the prison where the mob boss is being held and asks him to identify Luna. And just like the thugs or his employees that he ran into at the train station, they recognize the detective as Luna immediately and is like, that's her. So, of course, Young is very upset by this and is really worried for the king. So, remember how we just heard a mention of Young, Prince Pyong? Well, he's now at the palace and ready to tell the king what he knows about the autopsy report. The king's been waiting and he's ready to talk about it now, I guess. He admits to the king that there was strange stuff in regards to Yi Yim's corpse. I mean, the fingerprints matched as well as the blood type, but the fact that his neck had been snapped and then thrown into the ocean, and also the fact that the body seemed to show signs that it was born with polio when his uncle never had polio, that was very strange to him. But everything else matched up. I mean, it looked like him, had the blood type of him, and though his body may have looked different, it had to be him. Who else could it be? This obviously confirms with the king that without a shadow of a doubt, Yi Yim is alive. Especially now that he knows that there are parallel universes and that his uncle has the other piece of the flute that would obviously let him be able to pass through the obelisk. So yeah, to really scare you and make you worried for the detective, as the king is also worried for her, we see Uncle Yim at the local coffee shop where the detective lives. We also see it rain and thunder, and the weird sparkly stuff that we've seen on the king appears on Yim's cheek. It seems to be coming from his shoulder as well, as if it's spreading further into his body. I'm wondering if this has to do with how often you pass through the obelisk into the different universes. And now that we know that time stops in that in-between, maybe that's why the uncle hasn't aged at all. Like maybe when he's not making his little trips to the different universes, he's just hanging out in that in-between space. I hope I didn't ruin anything for anyone. This is just me gathering information from what I've gathered in the series. And these are all just theories, but I mean, that's the conclusion I'm coming to right now. And I'm watching the scene right now through the monitor, and this freaked me out. Oh, poor little kid. I feel so bad for him. Overall, this entire episode was so good. The discoveries that were made, everything was just great in regards to storytelling. And that epic war scene, I'm gonna call it a war scene, those epic scenes of the king at sea with all of the submarines and ships and just the overall scope of that was really cool looking. That was like a mini movie within a series. Overall, this was a great episode, and I'm excited for episode 7, especially after seeing the trailer for it. It seems we're gonna have some doppelgangers meet, so I'm excited to see that. This was a great episode. Obviously, if you are not watching this series by now and watching these recaps, you need to watch this show. I do not feel I am doing them justice. But great episode, excited for the next one. Series as a whole, I'm really enjoying. So, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time with the episode 7 recap and my thoughts. Bye. Had left on her phone. That's not true. Let's start over. The king offered it up to him. High School Young comes in. Excuse you. We get a glimpse of what's. Oh, am I in the spot? I feel like I moved. This part was a little confusing to me, but apparently. Am I in focus? Okay. The discoveries that were made, the plot thickenings. Is it really thickenings?